Um, Thank you very much. Susunod natin magsasalita ay si Carl. Lorenz Cervantes is not yet. Not tonight. Si Carl Lorenz Cervantes is a psychologist, researcher, and university lecturer whose published work focuses mainly on spirituality and indigenous psychology. He is the man behind Sikolohiyang. So kung familiar yung mukha niya, kasi sinusundan natin siya sa Instagram. But Sikolohiyang on social media, where he shares his research and insights with people around the world. Carl. Hello. Ay.
Hello. Thank you po sa lahat. Meron akong presentation para medyo structured yung... Hindi ko kasi maaalala. As a researcher.
Patayin natin yung ilaw.
Sige, kahit ito lang. Para makita ng mga tao. Sige, kita pa naman, di ba?
Apo.
Yes. Sige. So, I'll start with a story na lang. No? I'm sure this might be familiar also with you kung na-experience yun na yung mga albularyo and all that, yung mga nanuno or na-encanto or something. And we like to think of these experiences as hindi na common within our urban setting or modern setting, but these things still happen. Recently, someone told me, and this is a foreigner siya, kinwento niya sa akin, one time daw nag-aayos siya ng garden niya because he lives here with his Filipino wife, and inayos niya yung garden niya. The next day, hindi siya makabangon at all. And sinabihan siya ng mga tao, okay, punta ka dun sa dulo ng street. Go to the end of the street, kausapin mo yung tao doon, yung albularyo. And then, nung pinuntahan niya yung albularyo, sabi ng albularyo, you fixed your garden, no? Nice mo yung garden mo. Meron ka kasing parang na-block yung entrance ng bahay ng duwende, something like that. And then sabi nung folk healer, sabi ng albularyo, leave an offering in the garden, a plate of food and a glass of water, so that kahit paano ma-appease ang spirit na ito. And itong foreigner to knows nothing about folklore. Wala siyang alam at all. Hindi siya marunong mag-Tagalog. Tagal-tagal na dito sa Pilipinas. Does not know how to speak in Filipino. Anyway, the next day, after niya ialay yung pagkain, wala na siyang sakit at all. And yung pagkain parang naubos na. For some reason, yung tubig na inuman na. And he was thinking, oh, it might have been a dog. Pero if it were an animal, natabing sana yung glass, right? Pero hindi naman. And this way of thinking really shows us how we see health and sickness, or at least well-being, in the Filipino context or in the Filipino worldview. Hindi lang siya something na nangyayari sa'yo as a person, but it is something that happens in relation with everything else, with the world around you. And dun sa framework na ginamit ng folk healer, the first thing that they will always ask is, so anong ginawa mo? What is the transgression that you did? What is the social taboo that was done? And what is needed to repair the relationship? Healing in this sense is a kind of reconciliation. So, ganda, di ba? And that's the way that we think of it. But we often forget that it is a relationship between self, nature, and community. And we only think of well-being as something that happens to ourselves. Sabi nga kanina na it's a systemic thing. It's not just an individual thing. Sige, tingnan po natin. Next slide. Yes. So I want to invite you to think of these two kinds of worldviews. What we are used to today, or at least yung ating mainstream worldview, I would like to say, is kind of individualist, focuses on the self. It's linear in the sense na, you have an emotion, but there's a trigger, and it always has to go back to the root, and it's always causal, and it goes one way, and we see recovery as you were sick, and now you're not anymore. And it's just such a linear path, and we know that recovery is not linear. But anyway, we see it as linear. It's also hierarchical. It's also who's more sick and who's less sick. Or in this individualist worldview, nakikita din natin to in the way that we want to be on top. Di ba? Laging importante sa atin, when we succeed in life, we always want to be the top dog or always up north. Pag sinabi nga natin na things are going well, sinasabi natin it's going, looking up, di ba? And we feel high, meaning we feel good. But when we feel bad, ano nangyari? Go we feel low, we feel down, we're going down south, mga ganyan. So the metaphors of up and down are also important here. And dito sa individualist worldview, meron tayong kanya-kanya mentality na your well-being is your responsibility and nobody else's. Ikaw lang yan. But with the communal worldview, which is more aligned sa ating Filipino perspective, it's more contextual. Hindi lang siya linear na past, present, future. Hindi lang siya linear in the sense na before, now, after. It's contextual. Wherever you are in history, that's where you are, essentially. Kaya, medyo segue, no? Whenever we talk about going back to the ancestral roots, yung mga ganyan-ganyan, people like saying, oh, we should really just go back to our pre-colonial ancestors, ganyan-ganyan. But thinking about it carefully, that's just a kind of regression. Because the idea is, past, present, future, tanggalin natin everything else, dun lang tayo sa past. But we transform. In terms of contextual worldviews, who we are today is shaped by our past, by our memory. Kaya mahirap makakalimot ng mga bagay-bagay because we forget our identity. In fact, I don't know kung meron dito mga, medyo strange na, pero occult practitioners. Meron ba dito mga occult practitioners? Wala? So, in Filipino occult practice, merong libro na tinatawag na Karunungan ng Diyos. Have you heard of this? Wala ba? Medyo siya, no? Basta sobrang interesting itong book na to. In this book, it explores yung mythology ng mga antingeros. In this story, in the creation myth, yung tatlong persona, which is yung Holy Trinity, nanggaling sa pawis ng sinaunang Diyos, which is yung Infinito Diyos. And here's what made it interesting to me, is nung binabasa ko siya, itong tatlong persona na to, Diyos Ama, Diyos Anak, Diyos Espiritu Santo, ganyan, umupo sila sa tatlong bato na tinatawag bait, loob, alaala. Bait meaning sanity, meaning our sense of goodness, mabait ang isang tao. Kapag wala kang bait, ibig sabihin, you're no longer a good person or you can't be reasoned with. Loob meaning the inner self, ang ating authentic self. Alaala, memory, also our identity. So it's always contextual. Rather than hierarchical, where it's always about ako yung pinakamagaling, doon tayo sa solidarity. Kaya meron tayong term na pilosopo ka. Pag sinasabi natin pilosopo ang isang tao, it's not necessarily na magaling siya mag-isip. Of course, magaling siya mag-isip. But it's more like, kunin mo naman yung context, intindihin mo naman yung buong picture. Di ba? So, yung hierarchical model ng individualist or ng pilosopo is always about ako ang pinakamagaling, tingnan mo. But rather than that, we can say, hindi, intindihin mo naman. See the things that are non-verbal. So rather than kanya-kanya, doon tayo sa tayo. Imbis na pang kami, pantayo. Ito yung tinatawag ng pantayong pananaw. Alam na natin. Next po. So why are we looking at it in this way? If I were to simplify, if I were to incredibly simplify the model of what I think that our society looks like, it looks like this. Produce, consume, and so on. The more you produce, the more you can consume. If you consume the right things, mas makaka-produce ka kasi may status ka na. If you consume the right cars, the right shoes, the right whatever gadgets, and so on, you can produce more because you have more. And more status means more comfort, more power, more relationships, and so on. Kapag wala kang status, what are you? You're nobody. Wala kang you're nothing. You don't have any capacity to produce and consume. And I'm only bringing this up because this is why sometimes we feel dysfunctional. Is because if you can't function in this cycle, you're dysfunctional. You're called dysfunctional. Next po. So makikita natin, if you're unable to produce, ang tawag sa'yo, you're lazy, dysfunctional. Kaya ito yung sinulat ni Jose Rizal noong panahon, The Indolence of the Filipino. Diba? Sabi niya, in this book, which was, I think, one of the first decolonial texts in the Philippines, no? You read it, essentially ang sinasabi lang niya is, you can't judge Filipinos or the natives with your standards. Sa ibang lugar kayo nanggaling, ba't nyo kami dinajudge ng standards ninyo? Judge us by the way that we follow the rhythm of our bodies. Judge us by the way that we follow the cycles of the earth. So next po. So kaya, pag sinabi nating mental health, at ngayon nagiging buzzword na siya, no? Whenever we say mental health, and somehow whenever we want people to experience mental health, anong ginagawa usually ng mga companies? Okay, well-being seminar. Kayo nang bahala. We'll tell you these things, kayo nang bahala. It's very kanya-kanya, di ba? So, in this model of individualist or philosopher mental health, it's very much, you are the problem. So, hindi mo kaya mag-produce, okay? Problema mo. This is our system, it moves around. If you can't keep moving with us, it's your problem. It's your issue. Kasalanan mo kasi, kulang ka sa disiplina, and so on. And in this case, na-mention din kanina yung rest, no? In this model, rest is your responsibility. Have a rest para hindi ka ma-burn out outside of office hours. Di ba? So yung sense na magpahinga ka, pero on your own time, parang ang hirap din. Kasi after work, magko-commute ka pa. 1-2 hours, hirap nila. Pag uwi mo sa bahay, ilang oras ka lang makakatulog. Balik na naman, may gising ka na naman para lang makahabol sa commute. So in this model also, we have the idea that somehow you can attain status kung meron ka lang motivation, kung meron ka lang willpower, kung meron ka lang disiplina, you can have this status if you're good enough. It's a form of empowerment, kuno. Yung mga self-help book, mahilig tayo sa magbasa ng mga ganyan. You are the best. You can do it. If only you can change your inner self, your mindset, ganyan. But what does that imply? Secretly, is that kapag hindi mo magawa yun, you are a failure. If you fail, it's also your fault. Diba? And in this model also, nakikita ko din to sa social media. And we see this a lot on social media. It's very, very, very subtle. Nakikita natin lagi in terms of what are the top 10 icks of people. What are the red flags on a first date? Hindi pa nga kayo nagkakakilala, may red flags na agad. May icks na, hindi mo pa siya kilala. And in this worldview, we want to cut people off immediately without even knowing them. Hindi pa kayo nag-get to know? Alis na. And in this model of self-care, it's very much a you don't owe anyone anything. Kanya-kanya. Yung tipong cut toxic people out of your life. If they're calling you, turn your phone off, whatever, cut them off. Bakit? We're not saying that that is a totally bad thing. Because it's the only thing that works in a society that forces you to keep going over and over again. Now the question is, sino mag-a-adjust? Diba? If we start to realize that we actually do owe people, then that's when we can finally reclaim the concept of utang na loob, which to us has become transactional. Sobrang, pag may utang na loob ka, hindi ka makakagalaw. That's because we're used to that model nga of people being on top. Pag may ginawa ko para sa'yo, it's an investment so that you can pull me up. But if we think about it, kapag, for example, hinaharas ang isang tao, di ba sinasabi natin, utang na loob, huwag mo ko saktan? Right? What does that imply? It means, remember, we're both humans, we should be helping each other. Please stop. And yung utang na loob is not necessarily a debt in the monetary sense. Sadly, yun na nangyari in the kanya-kanya worldview. But it's not a debt in the monetary sense. It's what I owe people who have taken care of me. At yun yung nakalimutan natin, yung sense of solidarity with people. So in Sikolohiyang Pilipino, yung translation ng utang na loob is not necessarily debt of gratitude, it's solidarity. Next po. So, naririnig niyo na ba itong mga concept na ito, o yung mga phrases na ito? I'm sure, magdasal ka na lang. Others have it worse. Lahat tayo may pinagdaraanan. Huwag kang OA. Let's go through them one by one. At bakit ito individualist mindset, no? Iniiwasan ko, just a note, iniiwasan kong i-essentialize ang Western versus Filipino. Kasi minsan, there are concepts in the West na nakakatulong talaga sa atin. So, ang individualist, hindi lang naman Western yan. Minsan meron din tayo dito na kanya-kanya philosopher, ganyan. Yung concept ng magdasal ka na lang implies na responsibilidad mo na ikaw lang, just find the strength within yourself. Not saying that spirituality is useless. Of course, spirituality is important, otherwise this wouldn't even be a recommendation. But the fact is, this one more implies na ikaw nang bahala, and it's a very kanya-kanya. Others have it worse implies what? A hierarchical model. Merong mas magaling, merong mas wala. Mas sala. Lahat tayo may pinagdaraanan, so therefore, kanya-kanya na naman. Right? Carry it yourself. Kaya meron tayong concept ng tagasalo. Di ba? Usually, ito ay mga eldest daughters. Yun po. Sorry. Pero yun ang sabi sa research. Mostly. At itong concept ng wag kang OA really imposes this worldview of ano na tayo? Wala nang don't mess it up. Huwag niyo nang guluhin yung cycle na meron tayo. Next po. Now let's go into a more practical. And ito, titingnan natin, no? How do we actually try to face the way that we handle these social systems? Anong ginagawa natin? Siyempre, sanay na sanay tayo sa term na resilience. Laging sinasabi, resilient po ang mga Pilipino, ganyan-ganyan. After a disaster, we say, resilient ang mga Pilipino. We have pictures of Filipinos neck deep in flood, nakangiti. Somehow, sasabihin, kita mo, the resilience of the Filipino. What's that? Hugas kamay. Kaya nyo na yan. So, resilient kayo, di ba? Ayoko wala nang gagalaw. Right? So, something that has to be challenged, yes. Yung concept also of diskarte is something that we forget is a very important thing. A very simple example is, let's say, since ako teacher ako, and then I have a student na late sa class, and then sasabihin niya na, nahirapan po kasi akong makakuha ng jeep na sakay. And then, may mga magsasabi siguro sa kanya, alam mo, dapat nagising ka na mas maaga. May diskarte yun eh. Eh syempre, titingnan natin, let's take a step back. Bakit nga ba ganun? Bakit nga ba siya na-late? Bakit nga ba problema niya na na-late siya? Is it the public transportation system that we have? The urban spaces that we have? The design of our cities? Hindi lang siya yung may problema. Ito yung tinatawag sa sociology na sociological imagination. Meaning that we imagine ourselves as part of a larger thing. All our personal inconveniences are part of something bigger. So I invite you to really look at ano nga ba yung sistema na pumipilit sa atin na maging madiskarte. Ba't kailangan mo maging madiskarte in the first place? At itong lusot na to, lagi natin nagagawa ito, no? Basta makalusot. Bakit? Because the systems don't actually care. It's just superficial. It's very much superficial in the sense na there's this, lahat tayo susundan natin ito pero pag ginawa mo naman, hindi naman talaga nasusunod. So it's very superficial and really moralistic most of the time. Next po tayo. So let's try to see more practical sides. Last few slides na lang to so that we could be more direct in our approach. So, ayun nga. So our phrasing of your mental health is your problem and your responsibility, something we always hear. Rather than this, maybe we can see we can work together to challenge oppressive systems while practicing more empathy for each other. So hindi lang siya empathy, obviously, but this is a good first step. But aside from this, we're also challenging oppressive systems. Bakit nga pag ganun? Pero we can't just go out there and say, okay, let's challenge oppressive systems. Paano naman yung empathic every day? This is also very important. Next po. Gusto ko yung nagaganyan na siya. So, we also have this concept of you should take time to rest outside of office hours. Diba? In between breaks, parang nakakatuwa na nga na may 15-minute break or smoking break or whatever, pero bakit kinailangan mo ng break if the work should actually be something that's, enticing? Rather than that, we can demand better working conditions and reconsider our relationship with work and play. Bakit nga ba? Kasi ang laki ng dichotomy between work and play. Bakit ang work hindi fun? Why do we need to do it so we can play? Bakit? Why is that something that we should do? Why can't work or anything else also be play?
It's the produce-consume cycle.
Exactly. It's the produce-consume cycle, yes. We have to produce, we have to consume for what? And where do we go? And somehow in that hamster wheel of produce and consume, we're thinking na if we keep running on that wheel, aakyat tayo. For some reason, that's kind of weird, no? Imagine that you're running on a hamster wheel, imagining that you will go up. Huh? Nothing. Next one. Ito. You can succeed with sheer willpower. If you fail, it is because of your lack of discipline. Yan, lagi natin naririnig. Rather than this, let's say, we can challenge hierarchical systems and reconsider our practical attitudes surrounding success. What does success mean? Kailangan ba may bago kang sapatos? Kailangan ba itong ganyan?
Pencil case.
Pencil kit. Or kolektado mo lahat ng mga kung ano-anong bagong mga ano pang mga ayan, yun nga. Right, so next po. Ayan. When things aren't working out with others, cut them out of your life. People are only valuable when they are useful. Usually, when they can give you money. Yan ang ating iniisip, no? But rather than this, let's say, we can only challenge the status quo when we come together. That can only be possible. And we want to be, lagi tayo ina-isolate, pinapolarize, because fragmented people are easier to control. If you don't feel like you're part of something larger, you're much easier to control. Tatakutin ka lang, okay ka na kasi ikaw lang, akala mo ikaw lang. We can question our constant suspicion of transactional relationships. Ba't nga ba tayo laging suspicious na every time na may bagong kakausap sa atin, isipin natin, ginagamit lang tayo? Why was that the first thing that came to mind? Right? Yeah. So next po. So further study, ito, ano na lang medyo self-promotion, pero the work that I do is within the field of indigenous psychology, specifically Sikolohiyang Pilipino. I like looking into religious experiences, in particular well-being as it relates to ecology and spirit. So ako po si Kudiwa on Instagram. Ang ibig sabihin po ng Sikudiwa ay Sikolohiya at Diwa. Dun galing yung term. I also do therapy with Magis Creative Spaces, so you can book with me actually. So, yun po, psychologist ako. I was registered recently. Ayan. So, just in summary, the folk model of healing really is a form of reconciliation. Harmony is health. And harmony means finding yourself in the context of community, nature, and the world. Ayun po. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl.